بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه من والاه. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So today is what, Saturday? Today's Saturday? Yes? Okay. So Friday was the first day of the conference. I flew in Thursday night. Now, my Thursday schedule was actually quite tight because I had just come in from a previous convention that I was at in New Jersey. So I came in, and it's been a while, in terms of my fitness and workout schedule or whatever, when I travel, it just gets destroyed. So I came home, and I had pretty much a day, and so I decided that I want to try and get one workout in before I head out. And I know at the convention it's going to be almost impossible to head to the gym or whatever. So I go to my gym, and I'm on the Stairmaster, right? And I see someone who I thought I recognized, and that person is a friend of mine, someone who I've known for a few years now. Actually, he's from my community. And he's been slowly kind of finding his way back to Islam and getting in touch with his spirituality and so on and so forth. But recently, he was diagnosed with cancer. And basically, I believe it was lung cancer, and actually the cancer has spread to other parts of his body, so it's not looking good at all. And he just recently got this news, I think just maybe a few weeks ago, if not two or 3 weeks ago. And so when I saw him in the gym, I was very surprised. And I was like, he's supposed to be at home, and the reality is we don't know how much time he has, right? So, I saw him walk by me, I messaged him, I'm like, Assalamu alaikum, and I saw him go like this, and I'm like, behind you, and then he turns around, I'm like, hey, So I run up to him, and I'm like, what's going on? How are you? He's like, yeah, I'm doing a little bit better, I had some energy today. So I wanted to just get out and do things that I would normally do. And it's even though I can't, he usually plays basketball in the gym. And he's like, usually I'd play basketball, I'm just gonna walk around, the basketball court. So yeah, that was kind of heavy for me, right? Because here's me, I'm just planning for my day, and I'm planning for my weekend, and I'm like, I gotta do X, Y, and Z today, go to the gym, then do this and do that, go pick up a couple things, and all these chores that I have to get done, and then I'm thinking way ahead, right? And it's I hit this roadblock where all of a sudden getting in touch with, seeing him, I immediately pause and break, and my perspective, in that very moment, it completely changes. And then I started talking to him, and I said, I asked him how you doing and so on and so forth. And I've counseled him a little bit before as well. And he said I'm just taking it a day at a time. Right? And I said, in reality, if we were truly honest with ourselves, there's actually no difference between you and me. And here's why. You don't have tomorrow promised to you, right? And actually, they don't know, the last I heard, the doctor said, we don't know. Could be days, weeks, maybe months, right? And I said, here's me walking around like I have the next day promised to me, or the next 10 years, or the next 40 years, or whatever. But the reality is that I don't have that. And the reality is that, basically I have my time right now, and that's all that I can truly, truly guarantee. And so in a way, all human beings, we're in that same boat, right? Where basically we don't have tomorrow guaranteed to us, right? What is tomorrow, what is in the next moment, that is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we walk around like we've got, as I said, years promised to us, and sometimes we have this this number in our mind, and for some of us it's 80 or 90, or for some of us we don't even really think about it. We don't think about death, we don't think about the end of our life, and that's normal, because as human beings we tend to not address things that are difficult to address. Right? And for a good portion of my life, actually, I didn't think about death. And those of you who know my story, I started practicing Islam in college, and actually took my shahada. I accepted Islam in college, even though I came from a technically Muslim family. And one of the things that led me to Islam, and before Islam, I actually went through a journey of just looking for the purpose of life. And, I looked at other faiths, Christianity. I looked into the Buddhist faith, a few other faiths, and I found a lot of goodness in all of these faiths. I mean, to be completely honest, there was some aspect of Christianity and the Jews and the Buddhists, and they all had something that I was like, this is good, this is nice. But there was always something missing. There's always something that wasn't there. And it's when I came to Islam, and I came to Islam with from a very negative perspective, very negative point of view, because for me, as a young person and who's grown up with parents who are, technically Muslim, it was hard to accept the fact that they had the truth, or the truth was there in front of me my whole life, and I never accepted it. And I said, obviously Islam cannot be the answer, and obviously, this as well. When you're young and during that age, you tend to rebel against the things that are familiar to you, right? So I know people who are in love with the Quran today, and they swear by the Quran and this and that, whatever, but growing up, they didn't want to memorize the Quran just because their parents were like forcing it on them, right? So it happens. So I came to Islam, and one of the things that, led me to that point was, I was going about my daily life, and people often ask me, did something happen in your life? Like, did you lose someone, or did you have like a car crash, or usually that's those type of things that trigger something for someone to really change their life. And I usually say, no, nothing that dramatic happened at all. As a matter of fact, it was just a very normal day, but it wasn't normal for me because that was the day that I started to ask myself the big questions in life. And one of those questions was, what is the purpose of my being here? And what am I supposed to do with my life? And how am I going to feel satisfied in my life? And how am I going to make sure, and actually this came from one of the psychology classes I was taking, we were talking about how many people at the end of their life, they experience a deep sense of dread. Because they've lived their whole life and they thought they knew what life was about, right? Going day to day, they were just doing whatever they had to do, and they thought that they had found happiness, or at least they thought they knew where happiness was. And so they were chasing that happiness. And then someone shows up on their deathbed, or they're told they just have a little bit of time to live, or you're about to die, and they look back at their life and they're overcome with a sense of dread. And it's very difficult, because a person feels that they've dedicated their whole life to something that at this point, it doesn't mean anything to them, right? And if we look at the day-to-day stuff that we do, subhanAllah, in context of not being alive anymore, it seems crazy that we would spend so much time, even having an argument with someone, right? And I know whether it's online or otherwise, we spend so much time sometimes just trying to convince someone, and sometimes it's not even because we want them to understand it's just to prove them wrong, right? Just to have the upper hand. And if you look at it in context of, how short our life actually is, it doesn't make sense. So, once again, when I met this friend of mine and talking to him, one of the things that I discussed with him is I said, our early scholars, one of the things that they would say about life is that they would say your life is pretty much like you sitting here right now. Your life is 3 moments. It's the moment that passed, the moment that you're in, and the moment that's going to come. And so if you look at these 3 moments, the moment that passed, well, it's gone. You can't do anything about it. You don't have control over it. Whatever happened, happened. Whatever you did, it's gone. Khalas, you cannot change the past. And then there's the moment you're in, and then there's the moment that's going to come. Well, the moment that's going to come, we don't have a guarantee that we're going to have that moment, right? So people who live their life always worried about the next moment, well, how can you worry about something that may not even ever occur? And then there's the moment that you're in. And that is a moment that you really, truly have control over. And so you know how sometimes people say, just live in the moment? Part of that, yeah, I get it. If it's used in an irresponsible way, right? YOLO, I get it. It's not cool. But when I spoke to my friend and he said, I'm just living day by day. This is the day that I have, and it made so much sense to me. And I said, me too. This this is the day that I have as well. And so what am I doing with my day to make sure that I'm not only keeping myself in this life fulfilled and I feel like I'm fulfilling the purpose of my life, but also preparing for the afterlife. And that's why, subhanAllah, it's very amazing that when we start competing for this dunya, we can just get caught up in it. And it can seem like an endless battle. Whatever aspect of this dunya we're competing in. And I often tell people, and people don't like to hear this, and sometimes people even get offended by the statement, but I always say, you compete for this dunya and you're always going to end up short. Right? There's always going to be someone, like, if it's about looks, there's always going to be someone better looking than you. If it's about popularity and fame, well, there's always going to be somebody more popular than you, somebody more famous. If it's about having people respect you and know you, well, there's always going to be someone else, right? You can think that you've achieved what you have to achieve from this life, and there's always going to be someone else who comes, and then you're like, I wish I had that, right? And that's why people who have a lot of wealth, for example, what do they spend their life doing? There's no point in their life where they're like, okay, now I'm done. Right? Like, I've made enough money that I want to make. And like I said, we all have this life in our mind, right? This perfect life. Especially a lot of young people, they're like, I just need X, Y, and Z. And I often say, like, someone says, I just need to get married, make sure I'm making, I don't know, $200,000 or $300,000 a year. I have 2.5 kids. I have a Bentley and whatever. Like, this is my ideal life. Oh, and my wife, she's got to be hot, right? Supermodel, but also hijabi, right? Or I got to marry a brother who's, really on his deen or whatever. Mashallah, has a nice beard, like a hipster type beard. And also he's got a 6-pack or whatever it is, right? So it's this life that we have in mind, and then what we don't realize is that that's a fantasy. And the problem with fantasies is that fantasies are constantly changing, right? What happens when somebody does attain that life? When they do get that perfect life that they imagined? Well, what happens is, if they thought it is that particular life that's going to make them feel happy, that's going to make them feel fulfilled, and maybe that hole in their soul that they're trying to fill with that fantasy life, or what some people call that spiritual hole, or that spiritual darkness that looms over a lot of us. If we buy into the fact that, it's that fantasy life, like if I just had that life, like everything will be fine, well, on that journey, you may be okay because you're still reaching towards something. But sometimes people achieving that dream of theirs or their fantasy is the worst thing for them. Because once they get there, they realize that's not the answer. And that makes that hole, that spiritual void, that spiritual darkness, it makes it even darker, or makes that hole even larger. And that's why people will, at that point, usually, we see it happen over and over again. People either maybe turn towards spirituality, or they turn towards destructive behavior, and they start, going the other way. And that's why we have a lot of people who have tons of fame and money and whatever and status, and they turn to drugs or this or that, and they end up in with addictions to different things, and end up so many problems, right? And like suicide and so on and so forth. And why? Well, I'm not going to simplify their lives, but one of the problems there is the fact that they lived their life and they achieved what they thought was a perfect life, what they thought is going to bring them happiness, what they thought is going to make them feel fulfilled. And once they got there, they didn't get the answers. They still feel unfulfilled. They still feel that darkness, and they don't know what to do at that point. And so maybe like drugs will numb that feeling, and drugs do. They numb that feeling for a certain amount of time, right? And then that feeling is not numb anymore. And so you take more drugs, and you take more drugs until you get addicted, and until you reach a point, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, where it's like, what's the point of living anyway, right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And so it's when we talk about this journey and this life that we have, we think we have it under control. And the reality is that no one has it under control. The reality is that we need the assistance and support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And oftentimes, when we talk, like when I talk about this topic, when I talk about death, when I talk about how life is fleeting, and we talk about how we don't have a guarantee on the moments that come ahead of us, I often get accused of being morbid, or people, accuse Muslims of being morbid, right? Like Muslims are so morbid, you're always talking about death and so on and so forth, right? And actually, the Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged us to remember death. He said, أَكْثِرُ مِنْ ذِكْرِ حَادِمِ اللَّذَّاتِ. He said, increase in remembering the destroyer of desires. And the desires that he's talking about here is not all desires. He's talking about those desires that are destructive to our lives or destructive to our spirituality, right? So, Prophet ﷺ said, increase in remembering that which destroys one's desires. He said, al-maut, right? Death. So you often hear people saying that, Muslims are so morbid, or like we're always talking about death, and that's not actually true. Because as Muslims, number one, we don't believe that death is the end, right? If we believe that death was the end, then yeah, we could say maybe we're morbid. But we believe death is a transition from this life to the life of the hereafter, right? And not only that, our goal, because we understand death and because we understand how fleeting this life is, our goal is to make the most out of the moment that we're in that I mentioned earlier. It is to maximize our potential in what we have been given. So not everyone has the same resources. Not everyone has, for example, the same internet following. Not everyone is the same, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us all to be different. And even if we look at our physical selves and our bodies and so on and so forth, we live in this life where we put everyone on the same playing field, and we have these standards, and we can compare everyone to those standards, and it's led to so many problems, especially in like the younger generation, and I deal with this all the time. The issue of body image and self-esteem, it's plaguing this generation. Because all we do is we constantly compare ourselves to others. We constantly compare ourselves to this fantasy of what we are supposed to look like. Even a young Muslim girl or a young Muslim boy, and it used to be, by the way, it was just girls, or it was mostly girls that had to live up to this impossible standard. Now it's becoming like that for guys and boys as well, right? So just like, on Instagram you have fitness models, you have girls that are fitness models, and you have guys that are fitness models as well, right? And so this is the life that we're living, where we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, and it's led to a point where like that's what we're chasing, and that's what we're after. But imagine, subhanallah, you were told that you have to reach your potential, you have to try your best, you have to be your best self in the moment that you're in. Just worry about that. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about 10 years from now. Right? Look at the moment that you're in. Are you doing your best? Are you trying your best to be the best version of yourself? And I know, I mentioned the Stairmaster earlier, and I know like people think this is like a really dumb example, right? But when I'm on the Stairmaster, one of the things that I'm thinking to myself is, am I reaching my potential right now? Right? And I know it sounds stupid, and it sounds like really shallow. I get that. But it's not just the Stairmaster, it's anything that we're doing in life, right? Whatever project that we've taken on, or whatever we're doing, once we made the decision that this is what brings the most amount of benefit, and that's the other thing. Not only are we trying our best in the moment that we're in, but also, if we are limited in time, if the only thing we can really guarantee for ourselves in that moment, can we ask ourselves the question, am I doing the thing that is of most benefit right now? Not only to myself, but also in the world that I'm living in. Because once again, it's very easy to get sidetracked. It's very easy to get caught up in conclusions and outcomes. But it's another thing to say, look, this life that I'm living right now, am I picking things for myself where I'm going to be of the absolute most benefit? And recently in my community, the community, like the board, approached me, and they said, you've lived here for a long time, and you give like khutbahs and lectures and talks here, like in the masjid, but we want to have you on on an official capacity. And from the very beginning of me, like public speaking or whatever, my one rule has always been like, I don't want to become an imam, right? I have no interest in becoming an imam, and I get offers all the time and so on and so forth. Like pretty much, wherever I go, if there's a need, if the community doesn't have an imam, I get asked, like, can you be the imam? And I'm like, no. And in one of the discussions I was having with the board was this. I told him simply, look, I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm doing the best that I can do, right? I'm reaching my potential, but also I want to make sure that it's the best use of my time. Because wallahi, I don't know how long I can do this for. Not only is my life limited, but even my resources are limited. Maybe today I'm doing this, wallahi, tomorrow, and this is like a painful thought, but tomorrow, if for some reason they put me on the no-fly list, may Allah protect me, right? Say Ameen, Ameen. Then that's it. I can't travel, right? And I hate driving. So it's not happening, right? That's it. And that's not in my hands. So I can worry about that, or I can worry about saying, look, right now, in the moment that I'm in what I'm doing, I want to pick those types of classes and those types of things that I know that I'm reaching them, like I'm doing the best that I can do with my time. So I told him, I said straight up, sitting in a boardroom and like arguing with the board and arguing with like the president of the masjid because like we have a difference of opinion on some matter, or like I'm like, that's, with all due respect, that's a waste of my time. Because like I don't want to do that, right? I want to go and this is what I want to do. I want to speak to people one-on-one, right? Without any red tape, and alhamdulillah, things like Al-Maghrib has allowed me to do that and given me that flexibility. And even now, the conferences and conventions that I go to, like I pick, right? Like I decide. And not everyone has that luxury, by the way. There's some people who they're in a situation where they have to take a position at the masjid. But for me, that's one of the things I told even my local community, which I've lived there for years, and I feel very much part of that community, and I want to continue to do programs there. But that's one of my things. Like right now, I have the flexibility to pretty much say, hey, I'm available at this time. Is there an availability in the masjid? They say yes. I say, okay, I want to talk about this. I want to speak about this matter. I want to give a khutbah. Like that's it. And I had another thought about this matter, subhanAllah. And that is, I really thought to myself, especially after talking to my friend 2 days ago, and I thought to myself, if today was my last day, how would my message change, right? Because I'm coming here to Chicago, I'm speaking to all of you, which is an immense responsibility, right? The fact that you give me your time, you give me your precious moments of your day. What do I want to say? In that moment that I thought that, I felt incredibly free. Because as a speaker, like just hashtag real talk, we have to be very careful about what we say and how we say it, because things are misconstrued all the time. Things are taken out of context. We live in a very polarized world, right? And we just have to be wise about how we say certain things. And I thought to myself, I said, if this is my last day, who cares? Right? Who cares? I'm going to say what I believe to be the absolute truth and what I believe people need to hear, regardless of how many people, right, may take it in the wrong way. And yes, it's not that it's a license to offend people, because I think offending people is problematic in the sense that it goes against the message. So if you've ended up offending people, then you haven't reached them. You've turned them away, right? So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not here in defense of it's okay to offend people. We should be careful about how our message is received, right? But in terms of being fearful of the consequences, in terms of people may not like what I'm saying, and therefore, well, if this is our last day, then how would we lead our lives, right? How would our life differ? And so I want to leave you with a couple things, inshallah ta'ala, for today. And what I want this to be is just a reminder. Because the reality is we are surrounded by death and we are surrounded by reminders, but there's only few who pay attention. And we live in this crazy world where something happens and we immediately hear about it. And in a way, it's good because it's a reminder, but in a way, it's bad because we've become so desensitized. Right? When we're constantly looking at death and we're constantly looking at destruction and we're constantly looking at those who are suffering, well, at some point we get desensitized. So one of the pieces of advice that I'm going to give you may seem counterintuitive, and that is to turn off the news and really be selective of how much media you expose yourself to, how much news you expose yourself to. Because if you're constantly looking at streams and streams and streams of death and destruction, that yes, I mean, it should move us, but wallahi, I have been at like Islamic relief fundraisers where they are literally interviewing women who the day before saw, this woman who the day before she saw her husband killed right in front of her eyes, and the day before she was also raped, and the day before her young boys were killed as well. And now she's sitting by herself with her daughter, her newborn daughter, and she's just been through that experience. And wallahi, the brother's interviewing her, and the brother can't speak because he can't hold back his tears. And I look out, and I see a room full of people, like half of them are like texting and this and that, whatever. And look, I get it, right? I'm okay with people like being on their phones or whatever. And half of them are just disconnected, and it hurt. Wallahi, it hurt. Like, what has happened to our humanity? What has happened to our sense of empathy that we can witness something like this? Like, it doesn't get more real than that. Right? It does. Wallahi, it doesn't get more real than that. And if we see that stuff and it doesn't have an effect on us, there's something wrong. We've just hidden away, right? And when a calamity comes upon us, one of the first things, the 5 stages of grief, one of the first stages is denial. And I feel like as a world, and that's a convenient stage, right? That's one of the first things we do, we deny it, right? I'm not saying we deny what's happening, but on a subconscious level, we're like, if I don't think about it, it's not happening. And this really hit me when somebody was like, hey, check out this video, and I was like, dude, I don't want to see it. And then I asked myself, I said, why am I saying that? It's because that means I have to think about it. And that means I have to think about that child that is suffering. And then I have to think about their family. And I have to think about their whole world. Right? And then I thought to myself, am I denying myself the ability to empathize? And that is problematic. Wallahi, that is problematic. So what I'm saying here is be careful of how much you expose yourself to, but we should be exposed. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ said, increase in remembering the destroyer of desires, and as he said, that which connects you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really, that is our connection, right? So the connection to the afterlife is our death. So once death becomes real to us, then we will be able to connect with that afterlife. And like I said, it's not about giving up on this life. And oftentimes people quote the hadith of the traveler, right? Kun fi dunya like be in this life as if you're just like a passing traveler. And sometimes people take from that you're supposed to not care about this world, right? Like, oh, I could die tomorrow. What's the point of anything? And actually, when I started practicing Islam, some people actually told me that, right? They're like, why do you even bother? Like, why do you care about the way you dress or the way you look or this or that? Or what? Like, why do you care about what people think of you? Because you could die tomorrow. Well, that's not how we're supposed to live our lives as a Muslim. As I said, death only means that we make the most of the moments that we are in, that we try our best. And I think it was yesterday in this same room, I believe, I mentioned the hadith of the person, the Prophet said that if the hour approaches and you have in your hand the ability to plant a tree, you should plant the tree. Well, that is an analogy for life. If we have the ability to do even a little bit of good, then we should do it. Even a tiny amount of good, that we are able to do it, because wallahi, tomorrow is not promised. And in another session, I was talking about, it was here actually, I was talking about sincerity, and how we don't know, wallahi, we don't know what deed of ours could be that one deed that takes us to paradise. And we all know the hadith of the woman who gave water to a thirsty dog, right? And everybody knows what her profession was, right? She was a prostitute. And that hadith is so amazing for the very fact that regardless of a person's level of religiosity, most people would say, yeah, being a prostitute, yeah, you made some bad life choices, right? Like that's not, like even someone who's not, even someone who doesn't even believe in God may say, well, yeah, that's not the best thing to do. Or like morally, there's a lot of problems there. So this type of person that, normally we would look at a person like that and we would immediately make a million judgments about her. We would shame her. And imagine, subhanAllah, a woman walks into our community and we know that she's a prostitute and she wants to come in the masjid and pray. How would we treat her? Right? I'm not saying she made tawbah and she gave up the life or what. No. She's like, yeah, this is what I do for a living. Or I work at the strip club, right? And I want to come pray with you. How would we react? Because we would make 1,000 judgments about her. This is the type of woman that the Prophet ﷺ told us, because of one sincere action she did for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what was that action? Did she save someone's life? No. There was a dog who was thirsty. And subhanAllah, this once again, this narration is so amazing because Muslims as a whole, like we have this thing with dogs, right? We're just not feeling dogs. Right? Anytime a dog comes, we're like, oh, okay, nice dog from afar, right? And so that is the type of animal that I imagine. I have this crazy thing in my mind. I often think about this. Like, imagine if Allah gave me that opportunity, right? And I didn't even know. Like, I'm on the street and there's a dog that's panting, and it comes up to me and it starts like licking my jeans or whatever, and I'm like, ew. And I was like, that was my ticket to paradise, but I didn't know, right? Because I was too caught up on, oh, I'm going to have to wash my shirt or whatever it may be. That is the animal that she gave water to, right? Just water. She brought some water, she fed this animal that was thirsty. But because of her sincerity in that action, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave her sins. And she went to paradise. So how can we belittle any moment that we are in? How can we put off till tomorrow what we could do today? Wallahi, that one sajda, and I often mention that example, the example of that sajda. When we're in sajda, we always think to ourselves, yeah, what is it really worth? And how many more sajdas am I going to make? Instead of saying, this is the one sajda. Maybe it is this one prostration. And by the way, if you're looking for a spiritual moment, and we live in an environment where we are desperate for spirituality, right? And it's so ironic because we are surrounded with knowledge, we're surrounded with scholars, we're surrounded with resources of gaining knowledge. I mean, look at this whole weekend, subhanAllah. We're all here learning together, but in terms of that spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we feel starved. And one of the reasons is we don't pay attention. We don't pay attention to those moments that are constantly around us. One of the most powerful spiritual experiences is the experience of putting your forehead, the highest part of your body, the most noble part of your body, and putting it on the ground, even if it's dirty, right? That's why, like sajjada or not, janamaz or not, doesn't matter. Right? Even if it's dirty, and the companions, they would make sajda on dirt. Their masjid didn't have carpets and this nice foam and things like that. And their salah wasn't just like, oh, this feels so comfy. Like, that's not how they prayed, right? They put their foreheads on the dirt. They humiliated them. They humbled themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that moment, they felt like this is the most humble physical position that a human being can be in, with their forehead to the ground. And wallahi, we don't do it for anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Forehead to the ground, pouring our heart out to the one who is the Most High. If we really, really thought about that, then that would be an extremely powerful spiritual moment. Likewise, a funeral. When the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, when they would be carrying the body out to a funeral, people would say that for long periods of time, we would hear nothing, no words, no one saying anything except tears and crying. And it's not just the family. I know now when we go to funerals, like the family's crying and everyone else is like, yeah, this sucks, but let's get this moving, right? I got to get back to work, whatever, this funeral's taking way too long. And even look at the amount of people that come to the masjid versus the amount of people that follow the body out to the grave site, right? The way we treat death, once again, because we've become so desensitized, is very different. But for the companions, that moment was a very powerful moment. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ himself, he said, كُنْتُ نَهِيتُكُمْ عَنْ زِيَارَةِ الْقُبُورِ. He said, I had forbidden you from going to the graves. وَلَكِنْ زُورُوهَا. He said, rather now I'm saying visit them, go to the graves. فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُكُمْ بِالْمَوْتِ. For certainly they remind you of death. They connect you with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that's what death is supposed to be. That is understanding that our life is fleeting, that it's short. It's supposed to be an avenue for us to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And in the end, this serves as a reminder, because wallahi, we need reminders. And that's why when I get asked to give a talk like this, and this is like maybe, like I've given a talk like this over a dozen times, I always get very happy. Because, and I know we've all heard a talk on death and so on and so forth, but we need reminders. Right? And that's my third point. So number one, look for those powerful spiritual moments to reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Think about how your life is just moments. Number two, visit the graves and attend funerals. And number three, my brothers and sisters, is the very fact that we need people around us to help remind us. Right? We need people around us who will be like, you know what, something bad happened or whatever. They'll say, look, this is, how crazy is it that we are actually witnessing this? Because there's often people that we keep around us, and it's a comfortable feeling that they're around us because they help us forget, or they help us not think about what is actually happening, right? And even subhanAllah, I know these days, what is it, the Daily Show with Trevor Noah? You know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's cool that they talk about serious things in a comedic way. But a lot of times, the topics that are being discussed on the Daily Show, like part of it, I don't understand it, because they had a segment, alhamdulillah, they had a segment on the Muslims in Burma and the genocide that is taking place, but it was like peppered with jokes and things like that, and I get it, I get the point of it, right? It's so the people as a whole, people who normally wouldn't watch something like that would watch it and be educated, fine. But as a Muslim, right, we have to be at a higher level than that. It's, jokes are fine and jokes have a place, and even to joke is sunnah. I taught a whole class on, laughing and joking and so on and so forth. But there's a time and place, and one of the etiquettes of joking is that there's a time and place. And there's a time and place to be reminded, right? There's a time and place where we do get serious. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ, there's a narration about them, one of my favorite narrations. It mentions that in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, not any masjid, in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, the second holiest place on earth, I believe it's mentioned in Sahih Muslim, he said, the narrator says, the companions were running around and smacking each other with melon rinds, right? So they didn't have like Nerf guns and stuff, right? So they would just take melon rinds, and they're running around like pop, pop, right? These are grown men. That's the type of playful nature that they had. And then in the same narration, it says, however, when the matter became serious, then they were serious. Right? Meaning there's a time for this, and there's a sa'atan wa sa'a. There's an hour for this and an hour for this. Right? It's that other hour that we have a problem with usually. The hour when it's time to become serious, when it's time to contemplate. So keep people around you and ask yourselves, if you don't have people around you that remind you of the reality of this life and the fleeting nature of this life, then maybe you need to be that person. And I'm not saying you walk around and just be like, remember you're going to die, remember you're going to die. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying everything has a time and place. And so when those reminders come, when we see a calamity happen, or we see a death in the community or a family or whatever it may be, that we can be that person that can be like, you know what, this could have been us, right? We don't know, this could have been us, to remind us of this is life, right? And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ ذِكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Right? We're not perfect. We're not always going to be, fully understanding of the reality of this life, and that's why we all need reminders. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this session served as a reminder, first of all, for myself and for all of you as well. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu.